In the late 18th century, 13 small British colonies on the edge of the North American continent dared to challenge the most powerful empire on earth, the British Empire. What followed was not just a war. It was a revolution that would ignite a fire of liberty and change the course of world history forever. This is the story of the American Revolution, the dramatic and improbable birth of a new nation. From the spark of protest to the roar of cannons, we shall journey back in time to witness how a group of determined colonists fought for their freedom and created the United States of America. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a bill. After the costly French and Indian War, Great Britain was drowning in debt. To replenish its treasury, the British Parliament turned its eyes to the American colonies, imposing a series of heavy taxes. First came the Stamp Act, taxing everything from newspapers to playing cards. Then came the Townshend Acts and the infamous Tea Act. For the colonists, this wasn't just about money. They had no voice, no representatives in the distant British Parliament that was making these laws. This injustice gave rise to a powerful and unifying slogan that echoed through the streets of Boston, Philadelphia, and beyond: "No taxation without representation." Protests erupted across the 13 colonies. Colonists organized boycotts of British goods, refusing to buy the very products they were being taxed on. The air grew thick with tension, and in 1773, that tension snapped. In the dead of night, a group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into the water. This act of defiance, forever known as the Boston Tea Party, was a clear message to the Crown. The colonies would not be ignored. Britain's response was swift and harsh. They passed what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port and stripping Massachusetts of its self-governance. But instead of crushing the rebellion, these punitive measures only united the colonies further. The stage was set for a confrontation. In the early morning hours of April 19, 1775, a force of British soldiers known as Redcoats marched from Boston toward the nearby towns of Lexington and Concord. Their mission was to seize a cache of colonial weapons and arrest key patriot leaders. But word of their advance spread like wildfire, thanks to writers like Paul Revere. When the British arrived in Lexington, they were met not by an army, but by a small band of armed farmers and tradesmen, the Minutemen, ready to fight at a moment's notice. A shot rang out, its origin still debated by historians, but its effect was undeniable. It was the shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. As the war escalated, a new generation of leaders stepped onto the world stage. From the steadfast military command of George Washington to the sharp legal mind of John Adams, the diplomatic genius of Benjamin Franklin, and the eloquent prose of Thomas Jefferson, these were the men who would guide the fragile rebellion and shape a nation's destiny. As the conflict raged, the leaders of the rebellion realized that they were fighting for more than just fair taxation. They were fighting for a new kind of government, one founded on the principles of liberty and self-rule. In the hot summer of 1776, delegates from the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. They made a decision that would sever their ties with Britain once and for all. On July 4th, they adopted the Declaration of Independence. Penned primarily by the young and brilliant Thomas Jefferson, this document was more than a list of grievances. It was a revolutionary statement of human rights. It declared that all men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It argued that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. With these powerful words, the rebellion was transformed. It was no longer a colonial dispute. It was a revolution for the very soul of a new nation, a fight for a future where people could govern themselves. The path to freedom, however, was fraught with peril. The Continental Army, led by General George Washington, faced a formidable foe. The British Army was the most professional and powerful military force in the world, well-trained, well-equipped, and well-funded. In contrast, the American soldiers were often poorly supplied, underfed, and unpaid. They endured brutal winters, like the one at Valley Forge, where thousands suffered from disease and starvation. Yet, what the Continental Army lacked in resources, it made up for in spirit and determination. They were fighting on their home ground, for their homes and for their future. A critical turning point came in 1777 with the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga. This stunning success convinced France, Britain's longtime rival, that the American cause was worth supporting. French entry into the war provided the colonies with much-needed money, supplies, and most importantly, a powerful navy. The tide had turned. The final act of the war played out in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia. A combined force of American and French troops laid siege to the British Army under General Cornwallis. Trapped by land and sea, Cornwallis had no choice but to surrender. The fighting was effectively over. The surrender at Yorktown marked the end of major combat, but the birth of the new nation was finalized at a negotiating table in France. In 1783, American diplomats including Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay signed the Treaty of Paris. With this treaty, Great Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States of America. The war was won. A new nation was born. What started as 13 disparate colonies, each with its own identity and interests, had united to become a single sovereign republic. The United States of America emerged on the world stage not as a kingdom or an empire, but as a grand experiment in democracy, a symbol of freedom for people everywhere who dreamed of a better, freer world. The legacy of the American Revolution extends far beyond the borders of the United States. It was a radical idea in the 18th century that a people could overthrow their rulers and create their own government based on liberty and consent. This idea became a beacon of hope for oppressed people around the world. The revolution's success directly inspired the French Revolution just a few years later, and its principles fueled independence movements across Latin America and beyond. It proved that ordinary people, farmers, merchants, and artisans could stand up to the mightiest of empires and forge their own destiny. From the first seas of protest against unjust taxes to the final declaration of independence, the story of the American Revolution is a timeless testament to the power of courage, sacrifice, and the unwavering pursuit of freedom. It is the story of how a nation was born. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into history interesting, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shaped our world.